All right, tonight we're going to talk about presentation decks and their mystical, creative, problem-solving powers. So we're not going to talk about them as, this is how you make your work look professional and sell it to clients, because that is how you do it, but that's not what we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about creative decks as like a means to help you after the research phase with analysis of what you have and helping to make sense of like if you have a lot of options. To do that, I'm going to show a recent project. So you're going to get like a process a process presentation, and within that, how the creative deck kind of fed that along. I don't know what this font is called, but I'm so happy that I used it. It's going to be like this semester's hobo. What is it? Is it like nuptial script or something? I'm trying to embrace the idea there's no bad fonts. So the project I'm going to talk about is a record cover for this band, Josh Harmony and Company. So the project itself is design a series of record covers using DIY materials, handmade graphics, and library elements. In this context, library elements meaning things that make something look like a series, like Penguin books or records by the band Fucked Up. And we arrived at this kind of little subset of stuff from having a conversation about things that we're into. In the beginning, it was unclear if we were doing one record or doing a single a month. So it was kind of up in the air, like they were definitely doing an EP, but maybe they were going to also release 12 singles, and maybe the whole thing like is in this series. So that's why it's kind of a little bit vague. So part one, research. So this is the Pinterest board that I started for it. And we were looking at 45 single sleeves, 45 labels, psychedelic typography, this very DIY punk stuff from the 90s, more psychedelic stuff, random 70s, Cooper Black type stuff. So I make this board, and I download all these images. And I end up with big old folder of stuff. So I organize that stuff into these kind of subfolders. And that to me is kind of like step one of going from quantity over quality research into making sense of the research. So like these are what these folders are all filled up with. Just for sort of context, it's like the 45 folder is just filled with shit. Like who knows how much of it's actually good. So the way I make sense of this stuff as like an internal step for myself is to put it into a creative deck so that I have some way of organizing it and being able to look at everything all at once. So it's about organizing the research, it helps me edit, and it helps me contextualize what I'm looking at. So this is the deck that I made. It was for me, but I figured since I was making it, I might as well share it with them and see if there's anything that they're responding to. It's just sort of like briefly explains, well, one, it looks nice, but it briefly explains like, so this is just the research into existing art and design. It's inspired by conversations about handmade, DIY, series, as well as my own interest in psychedelic lettering and vintage 45s. Each page explains the concept, the big picture visual attributes, and the context it might work best in. Like, is this a standalone EP or is this the series? And then this is an internal document to stay focused, but if anything stands out to you as amazing or horrible, feel free to drop a line. So then I don't put everything into this because like I can't fit everything. It would be sort of out of control. Once I start putting it in this zone of organizing, it immediately helps me kind of edit, helps me figure out in what instances am I looking at basically 7 versions of the exact same thing, what stuff really doesn't fit, and it's hard to figure out how that connects to any other piece. And in this one, I'd write a little like concept thing, like hand-produced type using obsolete technology and or handwriting for a human punk feel. And then I have the attributes like, okay, so how am I gonna do this? Typewriters, rub down lettering, handwriting or tracing, plain fonts, functional, effortless compositions. This is like to help me get above the level of what I'm looking at so that I don't just, like, I really like this Honeywell orange thing here. So I don't just make that, because like that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is like figure out what's causing the feeling that I get from looking at this stuff, and then start to pinpoint what those pieces are. So like then another one was DIY materials. It's about like making stuff out of office supplies. This one had this nice idea that, you know, some of these records, like these two and these two, are from this label called Gravity, these two as well. And every pressing of Gravity record, the cover would be slightly different. They might silk screen it in a different color. They might have bought a new stamp for the record label, new colorway here. So like there's this nice like fluctuation, and that was like a nice idea of like, what if every instance of the record cover has a slightly different art? Like not dramatically different, like maybe the blues shift a little bit or something like that. And some of this stuff repeats from the previous page, because maybe I don't use anything from the previous page, but this fits with this kind of stuff. Then there was series design. So there's 4 of these fucked up records, and then hopefully that helps it make clear that I see these other things as potentially being a launching point for a series, and different ways of kind of seeing that. It's like psychedelic 45 labels, which are beautiful. More typographic 45 labels, and then 45 sleeves. So thinking about these like abstract, kind of psychedelic, but very modernist things. Oh, and psychedelic lettering. So I think that's the last page. So I sent this to them, not really expecting them to do anything with it, but just to say like, hey, I'm working on your thing. Because sometimes people worry about that. Like when you're doing a project for free for people, like especially bands are really used to people going, oh, can I do a thing for you? And then never following through because there's no money changing hands. So kind of sent it to them just to be like, don't worry, the thing is happening. Oh, and one more about like records where the psychedelic lettering looks like it could be a series, like it could repeat. This is incredible. It's called Joyce Bond. She's in the little James Bond circle with a gun. I didn't get it at first. I was like, why does she have a gun? But then it all came together. So what ended up happening, I sent them it to our sort of group text via a Dropbox link, and they just started sending screen grabs back, which was really nice because it meant that I didn't actually, by this point I'd started a couple things, but in general, I didn't have to make any decisions about what stuff to explore because Josh had sent these couple of things he'd liked and these. Somebody else was like, I really want to see the series kind of like consistent format. Colleen sent back the 45 sleeves and she really liked like this kind of high contrast, kind of muted thing. So all of a sudden I'm like, cool. That's all stuff I want to explore too. Excellent. So they actually kind of like, they ended up doing a brainstorm for me. So part 2 got into the design. So I think I've talked about this a little bit in the context of the film festival, but I try really, really hard not to have a clue about what I'm gonna do until it's time to start doing it. So like I knew we talked about like office supply type materials, and I was like, okay, well I'm gonna scan an envelope. That was kind of as far as I had gotten with it. I didn't wanna have any kind of like concept about it. What I sort of did was basically play in different buckets without the intent of making a finished thing. So hand lettering, scanning in envelopes, beating one up and scanning it in. These Photoshop experiments. And then a bunch of Letraset stuff, or rub down lettering. Some handwriting. And then I do this thing when my kids paint. I kick them out once they're done and I use up the rest of their paint. So I took that as an opportunity to try and make some circular stuff since I was looking at circles and to figure out what I could do with the paint. And then scanning a nice piece of that like kind of European letter writing paper, in case that kind of fed into it. So it's just a lot of playing and just like building up a library of assets, not really sure how they're gonna work out, And then I started making patterns. The other thing I should point out is this entire project was done while watching episodes of R.U.R on my couch. So just kind of experimenting with these circle patterns, kind of figuring out what they can do. I think that was just like 2.5 hours of fun. So then, eventually, they said, we have to have art by January 14th. And so we met like the week before, the weekend before, or something like that. And I was like, okay, I better just like turn this into something because I could continue playing and painting indefinitely. So I started bringing that stuff into InDesign and just start kind of working it together, doing different combinations of things. Some stuff is a series, some stuff not, like that's a standalone kind of one. And just playing with all these pieces that I have. That one's a mistake, but it turned out really cool. The image didn't load and it cut out half of it. So I would say like I spent 2 nights in this InDesign file just trying different stuff with the things that I had, kind of bouncing back and forth between Photoshop. I think this file has 19 pages. So at this stage, the deck, what is it? Oh, I didn't update this page. Shitty. All right, not organized research, but present the actual designs, and then it helps me edit. So when I have a ton of stuff, I usually use the deck to help me figure out what's repetitive, what looks like something else, what's just not as good. If I'm gonna go from 22 versions to a reasonable amount, like which ones are the standouts to me, and I use the deck because it just changes the context just enough for me to see it differently. I laid them out all up front just to be like, okay, here's everything, but then we didn't actually look at everything. So we do like a page that just shows the record, like, okay, here's the cover. And then to contextualize it, we would show it in its different environments it's gonna live in, which is really helpful because like some stuff, once it's that small, you're like, the things on pages 3, 7, 12, and 13, once they're on this page, they look the same. And that kind of helps you get rid of some stuff or helps you make some decisions. I didn't bother with descriptions because I didn't really have time to. I think I just ranked them in order of what I liked. Same effect on this painting. So I think I showed my top 10, and we divided them up into standalone and series. A series page, we just show them kind of at the end. And this one's kind of like, you could throw anything in here. You can throw my shit, you can throw somebody else's stuff in there, it's all good. And there's a big geometric series and a container. And so that was done. Even though this is like a helpful tool for me, it helps organize things. It's like if your deck is 45 pages, you already know if you have to present that to someone, that's gonna take forever, and you start to regret certain decisions. You're like, okay, we have to edit this down. Like we have this problem at work a lot, because like a Foot Locker deck really easily can be 45 pages. If you start showing them options, it could be 80 pages. So you kind of have to be like, okay, no options, just show them what we think is the best way to go. The one thing they responded really well to though was this page. Because like, you know, they could look at this and be like, oh, that's pretty, but then they'd see it here and be like, oh, okay, that would be cool. Like a series of those would be super interesting to kind of fill up that thing. And then they picked this one, or 2 of these, I can't remember. So then we continued our communications via text because one member wasn't there and they would just take photos of the screen and then text them, which is just, I love 2018 so much. The only thing they wanted to do was make the type pick up more of the texture of the paper and look like it was like more printed or more kind of like letterpressy embossed. So this was another episode of R.U.R working this type to make it look sort of letterpressed, and then that was the final cover. So the first part of this, that makes sense? Like being able, like you grab everything And then like the deck for me becomes part of that funnel of organizing the everything. So at step one, no need to make judgment calls. Like I don't sit in Pinterest and go, oh, I don't know about that one. You know what I mean? If it like is related to what I'm interested in, or it's like an interesting tangent, I'm like, cool, grab. And then I'll download everything, throw it all in the deck, but then I'll start deleting stuff and I'll start trying to make it more concise. I'll start thinking about if I was someone else looking at this and I saw this mood board, could I make sense of the concept, or would the different pieces seem like they were contradicting each other too much? But the one thing that this deck fails at is the idea of like rhythm and pacing. It's just an onslaught, right? Big image, 3 screen grabs, big image, 3 screen grabs. It's super hard to find your place in it because it's like all looks the same. So to see it in context, I mean, it's literally just like the same shit again and again, which with showing them 10 pages or whatever, that was probably not nice of me. Like the considerate thing would have been for me to edit a bunch of this down. So this is, I think, a better deck that's got like more of a flow. This was a soap factory project. There's big divider pages, like full bleed imagery, and I chilled out on the concepts a little bit. So you have like a research section. The research section has these big, nice quotes of things that inspired me. You got different types of images, you know, scans of the notebook I was making notes in, scans of the bedno diagram that I used to concept. The design directions page has got like a background image, like it looks like a thing, right? It's a little bit more designed and it's just got more of a structure to it. And then it's got these terrible sketches, god awful sketches, but with very probably good descriptions. So like much better kind of rhythm and plotting in that one. Other considerations, the idea of narrative or consensus. So this is another soap factory deck for a project, an exhibition called R.U.R, which I believe stood for Rossum's Universal Robots. And so prior to this, I never showed any clients research or ideation because I thought it was like a cop-out to try to trick them into the end result is inevitable. Like this just guides you toward it. But for whatever reason, I decided to switch it up, probably because I started doing these terrible, terrible sketches, and I thought they should see the research to understand like why I'm doing this. So I'd have like a research page, these big quotes that from the curators or from press releases or whatever that kind of help me make sense of it. These are very handy too, because like if you're the client and you see your words in gigantic type, you're like, yeah, dope, right? Because like everybody loves like themselves. And I showed basically scans of like my research, these different lists I was making, the different ways I'm trying to like attack this thing. And then these final keywords that I use to help me concept. So like this stuff isn't really concept. This is this is research as far as I'm concerned. You set up a prompt and then you gather data about that prompt. Ways of doing a project, to me, that's not coming up with ideas. That's just grabbing what's currently in my head and getting it down on paper. This is where, in this context, where the ideas come from. You make a list, put that list across the top and bottom, and then do combinations of them to generate concepts. And it's got like these design directions. And then within this, it's like a pencil sketch, a title. Like people love it when their concepts have titles, what keywords went into it, and a description of like, this poster concept is about this, it's gonna look like this. And that kind of helps like set up a story, right? Like you get to the design section, you've got background on the project. If you're the curator or the client, you see that we're paying attention to you and what you want, rather than my old way of designing, which was, so I was thinking about this, here's the masterpiece. I mean, I never called it a masterpiece, but I would just show up with a one thing and be like, here's the poster, what do you think? Which was shitty, or I think it was shitty. And then further considerations, virality. I don't have a better way to refer to this, but just branding on the deck so that if somebody gets it, like, you know, in a place like Adidas, it's really easy for someone to print something out and be like, oh, this is what this agency Latitude does for us, and hand it to someone in a different department. These things kind of get into other people's hands, and you want to make sure that someone knows like who made the thing. And it's like a balance between like, you don't want it to be obnoxious. Like, you still want the work to be front and center, but you also want to make sure that if for some reason this gets into other hands, that it's very clear who made the work and like who's behind it. So I just highlighted these little things, you know, like there's a phone number, an email, and a URL link throughout. And that is it. So decks are the best, I think. On most Latitude projects, I have like a totally private version of a deck that I don't ever share with the people I'm working with. It's purely so I can start to sort out the research, because we work in a really fast-paced environment. So having that deck helps me like organize my thoughts, helps me see connections between things. It might help me see a middle ground of like a simple thing and a complicated thing, and all of a sudden that's a thing I can do in a Foot Locker. And I didn't used to use them. It was really stupid. It's important as a tool, but the other thing is it's important as a basic sales device. Like, people outside of advertising, when you hand them, like if you show up to someone's house, like the meeting's in their kitchen, and you plunk down this thing and you walk them through it, it's like you wrote a book for them. Like, people are like, oh my God, this is so nice. And it's not like to trick them, but on the other hand, it makes people feel really special in the same way that quotes about what they do make them feel special and make them feel invested in the process. Like, making the deck and thinking about it as essentially it's like a gift to the person you're working with. Like, that seems like kind of silly and like overwrought, but I definitely think that's what you're doing. Like, if I had just shown that band 19 square covers in a PDF, it's so difficult to make sense of that, and I already showed them too much. But like, being able to see it, being able to think about other contextual stuff. So like,
like, how do you like know if one concept is like different enough from another one to like...
I'm gonna jump back into that. So I have no idea what was going through my head. I just think I couldn't pick stuff. And I was like, I stand behind all of these and I could live with all of them. Like, I would be happy to see any of them in the world. And I worked right up to the last minute. If I hadn't, I think I would have taken an hour, maybe more, and just made hard decisions about what goes in here, because there is too much and it does look too similar. If you don't know that, I think the simple rule is like, when you're getting in this thing, if it's unclear what the difference between pages 8 and 11 is, then you got to chill out. Like, you got to get rid of one of them. I didn't do that, and I wish that I had. If you're describing it and you're basically saying the same thing, that's probably a sign that they're too close. Like, if you can't tell the difference without really looking at it, or even more so, if you were showing it to someone and you're pretty sure that a non-designer really wouldn't get the subtlety between, oh, this one has a thin sans serif that's all caps, and this one has a grotesque sans serif that's all caps, which is literally the difference in some of these. That's a bad sign. And then I think if you're saying the same stuff, that's another one. I'm really happy having made this much stuff, except that it does sometimes back you into a corner of, if you like everything, then like, what the hell do you do? And especially like a record, whatever, like anything is fine. So then especially a record in like 2018 where it's like a thumbnail on a screen, like it almost doesn't matter. So that makes it more difficult to make a decision. It sort of comes down to going into it, knowing that you just don't show everything, and then you maybe show the things that are most different from each other. That might have been a good way to do it, but whatever. People are flattered when you make too much stuff for them, so that's like a nice benefit to having either no standards or a magic touch. I'm not sure which one that is.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps, because sometimes I am like
A downfall to, if you have a kind of quantity over quality method, which is like how I work, Like I stop something once I go, oh shit, that's cool. Then I move on to the next thing. And then, so like the bad stuff eventually turns into good stuff. But I just make stuff for as long as I feel like it, which is, it's hard to know when to stop. When you're making one thing, you kind of stop when it's like the masterpiece and you don't know what else to do. But like I make the process so fun that it's really difficult to know when to stop. Because like every aspect of it is fun. Like making paintings is fun, messing with them in Photoshop is fun, laying out all this stuff is fun, making patterns is fun, and there becomes a danger of like, okay, I've done a lot of stuff, I should probably stop, but it's really fun. Prior to these kind of ways of working, I did not find graphic design fun. I found it very gratifying, but I fucking hated it for like, from 2002 to 2010. Like, I'd just be like, why do I do this awful thing with my time? Like, what am I thinking? Because like, it wasn't fun at all. And I'd spend tons of time on it. Now I don't spend any time on it, but I make it really fun. And then it's like an addiction, and it's much more difficult to know when to stop. Because it's just like, just one more hit will be fine. I mean, it's like literally it. Like I stayed up too late every time I was working on this stuff because I would just throw Netflix on, throw Longmire on, and I pretty much would stop working when I was like, fuck, if the kids wake up early, my day is screwed tomorrow. That was kind of like the threshold for understanding when to stop. Any other questions?
Saddest sound is when you hear the birds.
Yeah, I hate the birds. Or seeing the sun.